Alright. I read your comments and I see that you all like mythology, folklore, and things of that nature. So to keep you guys happy, and honestly me too because I just love talking about these things, let's have another episode about something that maybe didn't exist but still had a strong impact on our culture. To be completely honest, I'm very excited to be making this video for you guys today. Like, I've been wanting to do this for a very long time, but it just never felt like it was the right time to do it. Well, today that's all going to change. It's time. Let's talk about vampires. Welcome to Vlogs with Knowledge. Vampires have become very popular in recent years. We seem to have so many movies, TV shows, and books all about vampires, and each show or book has its own little variation of what a vampire should be. But us, as historians, we have to ask an important question. Where did vampires really come from? I mean, they had to have come from somewhere, right? It's not like vampires are completely made up. Like, no, they're influenced by reality and things that actually happened. And if you didn't know that, well, now you do. But as always, let's put all this in historical context and get some background. Well, to be honest, the historical context in this case, just like the Achilles video, is the whole story. We're going to look at and try to trace back the origins of vampires to try to figure out where they came from. And I think a good place to start is to go back to the beginning of civilization. Because let's face it, that's where pretty much everything began. On this show, we've talked about ancient civilizations like the Greeks and the Romans, for example, and we've seen their legends and beliefs. These legends, especially the Greek versions of them, have had a huge influence on our culture, an influence that can be still seen to this day. So it really shouldn't surprise you when I say that vampires have some roots in Greek mythology. I mean, with all the different gods that the Greeks had, odds are that some of them might resemble a vampire, and there are some resemblances, but they're not quite what we know today as vampires. It's a little different. The Greek gods that are most similar to vampires were never really undead. I mean, by definition, a god cannot be undead. But they did feast on blood. They would eat the blood of people, animals, and even children. And already we can kind of get to see a pretty vague picture of what was to become the modern day vampire. Moving on to a different part of the world, in Slavic Europe is where we really start to see more similarities to a real vampire. More specifically, in Serbia, there was this detailed account of a real vampire that terrorized the local villages and eventually became a folk legend. Around the 18th century, there was this 20-year-old man that died of a sudden and unexpected death, and shortly after his death, people apparently saw him walking around the village after nightfall, and some even swore that they saw him attack people and even kill other people. Some people say that they saw him turn into a dog, and then after hunting down his prey, he would bite it and suck on its blood. Like, it really didn't help that right after this man died, a lot of people began to die randomly, and a lot of animal corpses began to show up with bite marks on their bodies. Sounds kind of strange, doesn't it? Well, keep in mind that this is 18th century Europe. Knowledge of science, medicine, and modern thought really wasn't known. Like, just like the medieval ages, this was a time of superstition and paranoia. Everything was and had to be explained by a curse or a witch or something of that nature. This story eventually became part of Slavic culture, and when the Ottoman Empire came later on to invade the territory, the culture mixed with the already existing culture of witches, which was already popular in other parts of Europe for like some centuries. Like, these two cultures kind of go hand in hand, right? We often hear about witches, werewolves, and vampires all together. Like, it makes sense. Slowly, some modern features of vampirism began to appear, like being contaminated if you were bitten by a vampire. And once you return, you would behave as if you were possessed by a wild animal, and some say that you could even turn into an animal at will. Obviously, this terrified the local population. Like, can you just imagine the situation if you were living at that time? Like, you have a guy that dies a sudden and unexpected death, and then shortly after, people start showing up dead and you have animals with bite marks. Like, what other explanation is there, right? How are you gonna explain such a thing? Like, it had to be vampires. Moving on, we then have perhaps the most influential book in terms of what really helped vampires become so popular, Dracula. The book tells the tale of Dracula, a very powerful vampire who lives in a castle in Transylvania. It was a very iconic book, and it's really the reason why vampires are so widespread today. In this book, we get to see a true Western vampire's powers in action. Powers like shapeshifting, turning others to vampirism by biting them, controlling their thoughts and actions, and of course being immortal. Like, while not all vampires are the same today, we can definitely see a resemblance and some influence. The character of Dracula was based on a real person, a Romanian called Vlad the Impaler. He was a ruler in 15th century Romania and was known for his violence by putting his enemies' heads on stakes to be publicly displayed. Like, that way people would fear him. As violent as he was and as impactful as Dracula's story was, combined with the previous influences from the Greek, Slavic Europe, and more that I haven't talked about, it really started a huge trend of vampirism that was to take over the Western world and really dominate a lot of its culture. If you're interested in learning more about this, which I think that you should be, I've gone ahead and put some links in the description where you can start. But now that we got the history out of the way, let's actually go back a little bit and dive a little deeper. I've mentioned some pretty weird stuff, right? Like dead bodies and bite marks, but I never gave you an explanation. Well, don't worry, I got you. Going back to that village in Slavic Europe where we had people die right after that man's death, one has to ask a few questions. Like, why did people die all of a sudden? Why did people say he turned into a dog and began hunting his prey? And most of all, why did the animals have bite marks on their bodies? Well, here's a possible explanation. You may not have noticed, but a lot of these symptoms have strong similarities to rabies. You know, the disease that animals get that is highly dangerous, that makes you look like you're possessed by a wild animal and makes you want to bite everything? Like, yeah, that one. That's what rabies does. Like, you become uncontrollable and you just want to bite anything and everything because that's how you infect other people. The disease, all it really wants to do is just to survive. It'll do anything it can to do just that. So that's why it makes you want to bite other people, because that way you can infect them and it can live through that other person. Coincidentally, in 18th century Slavic Europe, I'm smiling because the story is so funny to me, there was an outbreak of rabies, which would explain the bite marks, the blood, and really the morphing into animals. Let's face it, nobody morphed into a wild dog. Like, people just saw a dog with rabies and they thought that it was a vampire. Like, what else could you expect? Now sure, that makes sense, but it's not really a good reason for vampires if we really think about it, because it's local. What I mean by that is the rabies outbreak only happened in Slavic Europe. It doesn't explain why vampires popped up in other cultures around Europe. So why did they? Although the rabies outbreak wasn't everywhere at the same time, the general knowledge of medicine and science was, especially of body decomposition. You see, when a body dies, it decomposes slowly. It's a natural process that everybody goes through, but when you don't know the process, it can get a little weird. Just a little weird. For example, a body decomposes at a much slower rate when it's in colder temperatures, which is usually what you'd find when a body is buried on the ground. So when people suspected graves of being vampires and actually dug them up, well, surprise surprise, the body was relatively intact. As an 18th century European with no better knowledge, like, what would you say? You would probably think it was a vampire. I mean, what else could explain it? It was even worse when some bodies even had blood around their mouth. Like, the body was buried underground, but you dug it up and it had blood on their mouth. Like, you know what? I completely understand these people. I completely understand why they thought vampires existed, because it looked like a vampire. So why was there blood coming out of the mouth? Well, the usual vampire suspects were people who had died a violent death. And usually when you die a violent death, you tend to have internal bleeding, and depending on how the body is placed underground, some of that blood could very well make it to the mouth. Like, it's entirely normal. Well, it's normal for us because we understand the process, not for other people. For them, it meant that it was a vampire. So them being scared, they chopped off the head of their corpses, they put stakes through the chest to sort of like glue the vampire to the ground, which is why a stake is usually the best way to kill a vampire, and a bunch of other stuff. Like, to them, vampires were real, like they had all the proof that they needed. People eventually began developing other ways and theories of keeping vampires away, like using salt, using holy water, and even garlic. Although different cultures use different techniques, the big ones like garlic and holy water still remain popular to this day. In some places, vampires have reflections, others don't, some are affected by the light, others are not, and so on. Like, there are many differences, and I think that we can clearly see that in the different movies and stories that we have today. But nonetheless, vampires remain very interesting creatures. So that kind of covers the topic of vampires, one of my personal favorites, to be honest. I really hope that you've enjoyed it and that you've learned something. If you did, please leave it a big like, share it to a friend, and also do subscribe because it really does help me out a lot, because it shows me that you enjoy my content. So now it's time for questions. What version of vampires do you know? What's your favorite type of vampire? And do you know any cool vampire stories? Please do leave me a comment, I would love to read them all. And bonus points for you, if you do leave a comment, you might get featured in next week's video as a fan of the week. As you know, and as I say at the end of every video, I haven't talked about everything, and the things that I did talk about, I haven't gone into too much detail. That's okay, that's actually done on purpose because I want you guys to go out and research and maybe learn a thing or two. My name has been Darius Cosden. You can follow me on social media, the links will be in the description. And also make sure to check out my second channel where you get to see behind the scenes of this channel. Link is also in the description. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I will see you all next week.